quite in the spirit of the name of this gallery, L'étranger. We have never met before. We have not rehearsed this. We're total strangers to each other. And I think we'll kind of, if you don't mind, we'll sort of take it that way. I'm going to try and find out something about you. All right?
Yeah.
But it's not that I have not done, since I have to sing for my supper, it's not that I have not done any preparation, any homework. But my homework consisted of kind of last night opening this book that Joanna gave me, which is all about you, 3/4 written by you. But I will start with the bits that are not written by you. It includes 3 essays, I'm only interested in 2 for this moment, by Walter Benjamin and Bruno Schulz respectively. The Walter Benjamin bit in it is the task of the translator, very familiar to everybody. The Bruno Schulz bit, and I'm grateful to you for kind of bringing it to my attention, is probably not familiar to anybody really. And it's an essay which sort of very substantially overlaps with the Walter Benjamin part. Like Benjamin, it talks about language being kind of something which we only experience in a fragmented form, as Polish or Czech or English and so on. And it talks about the work of art as being the vehicle, perhaps, for kind of bringing these various fragments somehow together. I'm just quoting it from memory, but I'm probably misquoting it, but should say something like that, something to the effect that poetry finds meaning by daring approximations among the words. Tell me, why have you included these 2 texts in your book, in a book that is kind of written by you about yourself, in a kind of autobiographical volume?
Well, it's part of the obsession with the language as a living body, and its physicality. And while writing, of course, I was kind of thinking about the very activity of writing, of using the language in relation to objects or phenomena in situations in public space, and what happens when these 2 meet, and how the language is translating actually this experience. So I need a kind of I need the experts.
But there are loads of experts. Why did you pick these 2?
Well, I really like, especially in terms of Benjamin, I really like this kind of pre-Marxist period, when he's so obsessed with Kabbalah and with the kind of 16th century notion, almost 16th century notion before the Enlightenment, about language that is actually that covers reality like he says, like a rope, let's say like a glove, where there's no
translation covers reality, like what does he say, royal rope or something?
Royal rope,
like that.
yeah.
Whereas language covers the content, like the skin of the fruit covers.
The skin of the fruit, yeah. This is it, and it seems to be an ideal, recipe for a public project to hit the meaning in a way that's kind of, it's inseparable.
That's interesting, because Benjamin also says at the very beginning of the essay something that really, to me, very much contrasts with the way you go about talking about your work. And he says famously that in the appreciation of a work of art, the consideration of the receiver never proves fruitful. And then he goes on to say that no poem is ever written for the reader, no picture is ever painted for the beholder, no symphony is ever written for the listener. And yet you yourself, I only kind of very briefly sort of flicked through it, but for instance, right at the beginning of the book, you are describing, or sort of, in a rather beautiful way, you are a good writer. You are sort of thinking perhaps backwards, reminiscing about what made you put an artificial palm tree in the middle of a kind of major crossroad in Warsaw, referencing sort of Jerusalem and all kinds of things. I don't really want to get into the description of these works, partly because I suspect that many people here are familiar with it, or more familiar than me anyway, and partly because it's not really where I want to go. But when you are describing the process that led you to it, you are actually imagining somebody returning from work on a bus and seeing it, and so you are doing the exact opposite that Benjamin demands.
Well, I'm not sure, actually. I mean, you mean the kind of rehearsing the
No,
situation?
you are kind of imagining the viewer, and you are very much, you seem to be anyway, in the writing. I have no direct experience of the work, but it is in the nature of public work, no, that we imagine the viewer, and yet you choose this sort of rather sort of uncompromising, austere idea of art as sort of as something to put in your book.
Yeah, well, what came to my mind, it's not necessarily a direct answer to your kind of set of suggestions, but what's really important is in terms of retranslating the reality after something happens. What I mean is there is this unfamiliar object, something that does not belong to our, homely, domesticated reality. And in the process of recognition, of recognizing the space that you think you know, you have to go through the process of translation, and you have to accommodate this uncanny object into your kind of realm to be able to live in it and with it. And this is, this goes back to this kind of inseparable, idea of a fruit and a skin. It goes back to it. That's what I think. I mean, this is how I imagine this process.
So do you think that art is some kind of, almost like a kind of survival strategy?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I can't really imagine that we could survive without it, to be honest. I mean, seriously. Especially...
Well, it depends. It depends what exactly we mean when we say art.
Yeah, but this effort, as I say, I mean, it's a daily effort of translating, us to reality and back. And I mean, how do you imagine not to do it? I mean...
In a way, this may sound kind of provocative, but it's not meant that way. But in a way, it seems to me, when one kind of tries and pin down what we mean when we say art now, in the contemporary sense, where almost any form, any activity, any method can legitimately be presented as an artistic method. And in fact, the less it fits any kind of, if you like, classical or traditional conventions, or those criteria by which the works of art were once upon a time recognizable, the more it seems to qualify as art. Does that not actually demonstrate that perhaps in terms of the kind of, we couldn't live without it, that in fact the state of the art, or the state of what we call contemporary art now, is the proof that we could, because we are doing the same things that everybody else is doing.
Yeah, sadly, you're right.
So can be or can't be. Let's try. Let's put it to a test. How long will we last without that?
Yeah, it's a matter of definition, obviously, this dynamic field that we describe as art, what it actually is. But I give you one example of how it actually can literally help. I was invited by an Indian artist living in Warsaw, whom I don't know, who settled in Warsaw, which is fantastic, and is part of a mysterious collective to prepare a project for architecture biennial in Venice. And while just looking at him, he was such a nice guy, and the idea of a collective of this, as he described, a hive mind, collective thinking, collective kind of triggering each other, triggering imagination. I came up with an idea of a mountain where we can all live, like physically live. And then of course it became immediately a strategy for the future, for the survival, that we can actually carve our little niches and accommodate ourselves in it, like in this kind of a huge, like enormous hill where we would kind of collectively survive the upcoming catastrophe that somehow it's in the air and everyone knows it. So
I know it's cool. Thank you. I did some precautions, yeah.
So yeah, there's this moment where actually art can be useful.
Would you live in the mountain?
Well, if I had to, sure.
If you had to?
If I had to. Yeah.
I'm asking because another thing that kind of strikes me about you on the grounds of just, flicking sort of through this, is you seem to be a kind of, your existence seems to be rather kind of peripatetic. You seem to, go to all kinds of, these peripatetic artists, it's a kind of category, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you seem to go to all kinds of places, do all kinds of residencies or whatever projects, some of them kind of, result in something tangible finished, some of them result in ideas that may kind of one day be developed into something else. But you move about quite a lot, so how would you live in a mountain? I mean, it seems to me slightly, I think we ought to acknowledge our privileges.
Yeah.
And, we come up with a sort of idea how we can build a mountain in which we all can survive, except that I now have to go to Korea because I'm doing a residency there. I just stay in the mountain, just be safe, I'll be back maybe. No, what is this, how important, anyway, I'm joking, but how important is this sort of mobility to you? How important is it that you do move about, or at least, again, on the grounds of the sort of potted history of your various public interventions and so on, they seem to be all over the place, geographically.
I'm actually not that mobile as it seems.
You make it sound terribly kind of.
Yeah, well, I used to be. I'm not very much anymore. And, I regret it because I don't do any residencies anymore. I just can't afford it because I have a child. And, but still, every trip, like just for an exhibition or whatever, presentation, a lecture, just, I really cherish it. I really enjoy it because it makes me, learn there's something that, and I'm very conservative actually. I learn with difficulties, and I really make an effort. And every time when I come from, like I just came from Japan, where it's a culture that I have no idea about. The relation between or the human relation with the inorganic matter, for example. It's like endless field of experimentation. It's fantastic. So I think I really need it, and I would like to do it again, but I just have no means of doing it. There's this moment of meeting something that you really don't understand. You don't even accept it. You don't like it. You just don't want it. And you have to accommodate it somehow. I love it.
So that's kind of different, isn't it? If art then it's not really so much about, strategy for survival, but a kind of your way of trying to understand something, and at the same time acknowledging the kind of strangeness of it.
Well, if you read the book, you know that I actually use my body as a kind of a little testing ground, where
Well, the body, I presume, comes with you, yeah, when you travel. So
usually yes, it does.
That's the constant. Yeah. But somehow what triggers the process, maybe it's really for you to tell me, but maybe it's sort of half somehow within the person, even physically within the body. But somehow it needs that kind of like a catalyst, something from the outside. And it seems that, I'm only speculating, because when somebody says, I like it, I miss it, that's not kind of very much to go by, really. I like sausages, and this, that, it's sort of, it's not very much to go by. But that, you seem to be responding to something that you perhaps don't understand, or something unfamiliar, or something strange, as you described it from the instance of Japan, in order to activate that sort of inner understanding that's within the body somehow.
Yeah, that's precisely it. I have nothing to add, really.
I will have to charge a little more. Anyway, all right, let's turn the leaf, as it were. No pun intended. I kind of guess that maybe not in the works themselves, but in the practice, or style, or method, or way of doing things, or whatever it is, that there is quite a great autobiographical component. Is that sort of correct?
No, absolutely, even in the weapons. Yeah.
What's autobiographical about the weapons?
Well, I'm sure it will come down to the question like the origins of the work. So I was trying to answer this question myself, and it's not straightforward, but that kind of, there's a few images that I associate with the process of coming to this final series of painkillers. And one of the moments that actually triggered or energized, activated the whole process of actually doing it was when I was actually in hospital with my daughter, and she was undergoing the chemotherapy. And it turned out that the protocol in Poland, because she had it in Poland and in Britain, is different in Poland and is different in Britain. So there are different doses. And I asked the doctors, and I said, well, why are they different? Like, why she has weaker chemo in Poland and stronger chemo in Britain? And he said, it was a British doctor, he said, there's a pressure from pharmaceutical companies. So, yeah, there's a different protocol. It's just higher doses.
You say that, shouldn't it?
Well, I never checked it, actually, whether this is true or not, but it seemed like he was quite serious about it. And, but they were definitely different. The diagnosis was the same, exactly the same. So, and yeah, it's just, I live in a constant terror of...
that is a very shocking kind of thing to happen because the doctor is totally failing in everything, in the kind of, in ethical sense. But I'm not simply thinking in terms of a shock. So something like that would, it's difficult to come to terms with, I imagine, when a doctor is kind of feeding a patient, your daughter, with unnecessary high dose of and admits that that's a kind of pressure from, I don't know, the hospital administrators who are under pressure from pharmaceutical companies. It's a sort of, that's a kind of shocking thing. But it's not only in terms of these sort of exceptional, let's call them, moments in life. I think I have a kind of strong feeling that, and that's kind of being really ignorant about your work in terms of direct experience of the work, that somehow there is a large sort of autobiographical component. To some extent, every work of art has some kind of autobiographical component.
Absolutely.
Inevitably. On the other hand, the cliche is that really no work of art is about the artist, and if it is, then it is probably no good. And so, where is that sort of, is the practice, is the kind of body of work rather than individual pieces, does that amount to some sort of autobiography? Because the way you write about it, and that's really what I'm going by, seems to be incredibly kind of diaristic. You write with this sort of, in a kind of mode or tone that I would associate with kind of well-written diaries, but diaries that are sort of intended for publication eventually and so on. A kind of a diarist or blogger, maybe we call them these days. People who kind of write in the sort of expectations that somebody might read, but it's not essential if it is really ever read by anybody. It's written for a kind of, it's written in a way that makes it readable, without necessarily the aspiration to kind of address anybody in particular. And so, it seems to me that this thing, this kind of diaristic trait that I detect in your writing, I somehow detect across the kind of range of work in the practice as well. So, but I can't piece together out of what I detect any kind of biography, really.
But in terms of this particular project, you want to...
No, it doesn't matter to me if we are talking about this particular project or your practice in general. I'm just trying to kind of push you to sort of show, where the kind of real life is behind the practice, rather than the individual works. But we can talk about the individual works.
Well, I wouldn't do anything if I didn't have this very particular moments, in life that seem to be critical, that they really push me in a certain direction. I mean, I can't, this project is not based on a research, obviously. I couldn't do, I'm not able to do any project based on research of any kind. And it's just like, no, it's dead. It's completely dead. I'm not this type of artist. I know that it's possible that you diagnose, you understand, you diagnose, and then you present the final outcome. But for me, it's just so boring if I understand beforehand. I'm
completely on your side.
Yeah, it's like I have to have this moment of not understanding, not knowing, a complete blackout, and then I do a project just to learn what it is actually. And this project is unique anyway because the objects, I had to kind of at least imagine the final result and so on. But they're also autobiographical in a way that I'm very interested, as much as I'm interested in materiality and physicality of the language, I'm interested in physicality of our bodies and how much they are dependent on kind of massive amount of chemicals we put in them. And also, from different perspective, how much both weapons and pharmaceuticals are designed for bodies, And there's this, actually for the bodies of perpetrators and for the bodies of the victims, or for the patients, the doctors and the patients, perpetrators and the victims. It's all just, circling around the body, human body, obviously. And It's a very, really strange relationship with the body in it, and it's this kind of negative dialectics, you know, that it doesn't push anything forward. It seems that knowledge kind of annihilates itself in a way. You know, we seem to make a kind of a progress, and then, of course, like we kind of remove the effects of it. It's worrying, really. I mean, if not worrying, then it's, well, at least very interesting. And why we do it as a, you know, post-enlightenment culture. Why does it go this way? Yeah.
Well, which other way could it go?
Yeah. But it's all contention, you know, it's like...
Interesting. And yet, when I look at these things, let's talk about these things. When I look at these things, you have chosen a very kind of, I mean, there are sort of strong aesthetic objects of certain sort. They have a great aspiration, evident aspiration to me, to be considered as sculpture, complete with the sort of plinths which remind me very much of a certain kind of, you know, convention, slightly sort of perhaps anachronistic right now, but certain definitive kind of convention in the presentation of sculpture, the kind of absence of any color in it. Now, the material, which I need extra information to know what the material is,
Yeah.
and that's fine, you know, and it gives it a kind of, it gives the work sort of conceptual dimension, but in terms of the scale, of the display, of the way they are, for instance, here, a group of kind of objects at sort of, you know, various sort of heights which relate to the kind of viewpoint of the sort of standing person, that sort of, whatever you call it, the thing you look through, you know, is at the eye level, and the gloves are at the kind of waist level, and so on. There are real kind of sculptural, spatial sort of considerations, very kind of conservative
Absolutely.
and sort of classical. So, how do I reconcile that with that sort of need, if you like, or the pressure even, I feel, to acknowledge the content? What if I say, well, I don't really care, you know, sorry, you know? And if I am free to say that, which I obviously am, or not obviously, but which I am, which I will assume I am, then is that something that sort of you can live with? If I simply say, well, you know, don't do sculpture unless you mean sculpture, for instance.
Say it again?
Don't do sculpture unless you mean sculpture.
Ah.
What I'm trying to say, this is not this is not meant in any kind of critical way, but what I'm trying to say is that you choose a very kind of conservative form, or not very, but conservative, let's call it classical.
Yeah.
Classical methodology, casting, metalwork, and so on. Classical form of display, and so on. And at the same time, you seem to claim some kind of something that sort of undermines that, or is supposed to undermine it in my experience. Because in fact, when I see these things as a response to a trauma in life, in their symbolic kind of content thing, then they become something else, but I cannot discount the sculpture. So, the fact that they are presented as works of sculpture. And so, what I'm looking for is some kind of comment about that tension between, if you like, a critique of the situation in the NHS system or capitalism in general or whatever it is that we are talking about here, and the kind of specific comments or specific position vis-a-vis art history, art, the craft of sculpture, and the kind of function of the aesthetic experience, or the kind of coordinated, orchestrated aesthetic experience in our lives.
Well, there's one factor that might be helpful here. It's the fact that most of my projects just are triggered by the feeling of helplessness. And that should be the answer, actually.
So is it, since I'm an artist, which is a pretty useless kind of thing to be by definition,
Yeah.
I can't do anything else. That's the best I can do.
Yeah, but also, disbelief that art can really change anything, in a effective way. It's an illusion. It's the whole rhetoric about. Now I'm digressing a little bit, but art for social change and so on. And it's like I'm really tired of it, and I absolutely don't believe in it. Yeah.
And yet,
Yes, exactly.
This
thing is.
yeah.
Yeah.
It can't change anything, it won't change anything, you can take for granted. I've been around for long enough to
Yeah.
have given up on that idea. And yet, we have to behave as if.
It was.
But this as if is not simply a kind of self-delusion, is it? It's there perhaps to open some kind of space for imagination, whilst we know at the same time that how is it? I've now forgot who said that. That's supposed to be a professor. Art is allowed to flourish as long as it repeatedly reassesses the vanity of its aims. So,
Yes.
in other words, kind of the world that we live in reserve this very clear zone where everything is possible, every transgression is not just possible, but it's actually anticipated and almost demanded. But it's only art.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
under the condition that we say that we declare that it's only art, we can be making art. Now, but when you reverse it and say, well, but the world kind of maybe needs, I don't know, a revolution more than it needs aesthetic pleasure, more than it needs intellectual kind of stimuli through art.
But I will come back to your question at this point, because I think it's a good point. When you said that this is, conservative or classic or whatever, this is exactly, they were designed to be art objects and nothing else.
Mm.
So there's no subversive look, there's nothing that is actually, unexpected, let's say. This is a classic exhibition of classic objects, and it was meant to be like that. Because I wanted to I wanted to imagine that the nuclear core, that the Uzi submachine gun, and so on, they're just objects of art. And I focused actually and made lots of effort to design the whole thing so that it looks like an object of art and nothing else. So, in a way, I wanted to kind of annihilate its deadly power by making it only art and nothing else. So that was the strategy, just imagine the army, equipped with the polyurethane resin casts of weapons. That would be fantastic, something that cannot shoot or cannot work. It's just useless. It's completely useless. So there's this element of magic trick that kill it in a way, the power of weapon with art.
But what I'm trying to kind of get at is that you use the phrase to make it look like art. Let's kind of, let's shift it. Let's say, forget the look like art.
Uh-huh.
You make these objects to be art, to be recognizably works of art.
Yeah.
But isn't that actually a critique, if you like, of the art system?
Yes, of
And
course.
of what we understand it, rather than of the Uzi submachine guns and the kind of miseries that they cause?
No, that's exactly the path I imagined people will follow. That, so.
But then again, are we not kind of ending up kind of completely naked and and disarmed and powerless if on the one hand we start with the kind of anger over the kind of terrible and really murderous kind of influence or effects or interest of the pharmaceutical industry, our personal kind of, anguish and very kind of strong emotions, and end up in the critique of art.
But that was exactly my,
No, but then kind of, by exercising that sort of critique of art, are we now, again, no pun intended, but throwing all our arms away, just sort of there's nothing left.
Yeah, but I'm there, I'm at this point, and this is kind of a 0 point, I know, but...
I don't blame you for contradiction, I love contradictions, it's actually good, But it is, on the one hand, we can't survive without art, on the other hand, we kind of can't survive with it either, because, somehow we are saying through the works we do that art is impotent in terms of doing anything about the world.
But there are two different things. You're talking about two different things. We're talking about this particular project that is, a text, let's say. It's a, finished text. And we talked about a practice that is never ending and practicing art. There are two completely different things. So we should separate them, we should make it very clear. Because, as we know that the whole practice is kind of existential exercise. It's a play with ourselves, with our lives. Because what else could we do, as you said? And that's one thing, and that's completely different.
Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
Much nicer than having a job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally agree, and much more pleasant probably. And the project, as it is, it's locked in itself, in its kind of inabilities. It starts with a kind of high critique of the funny relationship between the pharmaceutical industries and military industries, and then sometimes it's relatively high tone, and then goes down and down and down to the moment when I'm saying, I'm not innocent outsider. Look, there's a commercial gallery, there's a set of nice looking objects that are for sale, and isn't that ironic?
Well, is it ironic?
It is, but this is exactly how we work. This is how.
Explain. I don't know if it's
irony. In what way is it ironic?
Because, yes, it is. I mean, we are again in the same set of relationships, with the world. That we are kind of locked in this mechanism of capital. And it's not different than the relationship between, or the final, dialectics of the companies that produce weapons and at the same time produce pharmaceuticals that, kind of...
By the way, as a fellow Eastern European, I hate going into that kind of corner of the woods, but there we are. Have you ever heard, do you know the name Ilya Ehrenberg?
Yeah.
Well, for the second volume of your book, highly recommend it. If you need to slip some kind of text in. There is this amazing thing which I don't know if it has ever been translated into English. I read it in Russian in my young days, and it's, in my translation, the title would be something like The Life and Adventures of Julio Kurenito. Ilya Ehrenberg, for those who don't know, was a Soviet journalist.
Yeah.
Can't remember when he died, but he certainly kind of wrote throughout the kind of first half. I think he died after the Second World War, but throughout the first half of the 20th century, and he was a very able kind of journalist and so on, and he wrote a bit of fiction, and this is a kind of a science fiction thing. And this guy, Julio Kurenito, is an entrepreneur somewhere in the 1920s, it would have been the kind of western part of the world. And he gets somehow involved in the Soviet Revolution and the building of the Soviet state. And he's kind of intrigued by these interesting ideas of cooperative economy and solidarity and whatever, and offers his services to the Soviet state. And his services consist of the services of two companies that he owns. One is called the Universal Necropolis, and it's a funeral service, funeral directors, but on a global kind of scale. And the other one is the Olive Branch Ammunitions.
Yeah.
And as a deal, he offers that every soldier who is killed, who can be demonstrated that the soldier was killed by an Olive Branch ammunition bullet, will get free funeral with the Universal Necropolis. It's a great business model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the same. Yeah, this is the same business model.
All right. Shall we open it a little bit before we get started?
The towel in the centre of the room, because to me,
I
that's
won't
the
say about a towel in the centre of the
that's
room.
the unspoken part that I think is really central to the whole set of relations. And to me, it seems the part that seems to be most needed to be talked about.
And is it also an analgesic powder?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
So you made a cast and...
Yeah, but
All right, one question at a time.
Okay. So it's a story of the British Army invading or colonizing North America, and apparently and that's documented. The order was issued that they should hand out the blankets contaminated with smallpox to representatives of local tribes, and this happened. But however, these people actually didn't die. But the whole colonization of Northern American Indians were, as we know, resulted in massive deaths of the indigenous population. I mean, yeah.
Genocide.
It's genocide, because they were not immune against the European diseases, and this is a kind of a model for biological weapon of mass destruction. So this kind of, I thought it's a perfect example of it. It's a
Because
prototype.
it can be very misinterpreted. And I'm very interested in the idea of it also being not on a plinth, because the loadedness of the plinths. I wanted to understand why you made that decision.
Not to put it on the plinth.
Yeah.
Because that was the only kind of domesticated object. The rest belongs to a register of military equipment, and this doesn't.
So you were playing into its innocence.
Yeah.
It's got total
Maybe perhaps it's to do with the kind of, just the idea of touch, don't touch, and so on. Once you put something on a plinth, it's a don't touch, isn't it?
Yeah.
So.
There is something, because this is the only object that has a texture as well, so it asks for touching actually.
Sorry, it's not okay.
No, as I was just saying, it's got peace and tranquility to it. That's what penetrates towards me. It's so peaceful, the blanket and...
Yeah, well, but the nuclear core also looks like a kind of a domesticated object, almost like a fruit bowl or something. And they actually look quite innocent. There's when I researched the whole issue, it's a massive amount of objects that look simply beautiful. I mean, people are really fascinated with guns and all sorts of killing devices. There's the war machines, it's a universe on its own. And actually, I forgot to actually mention when we were talking about bodies. In this research, it's apparent that actually human body is missing in it, although it's all designed for the body, for the human body. But for example, when you look at the drawings, which are opposite the crystal, they're wound profiles, which means that it shows how a bullet or a shell penetrates the body. And it's funny that actually the actual effect, the suffering of a victim is missing in it. And it's the same with the bullets diagrams, the schemes, the weapons taken apart to its basic elements. Body is not present there. So although it's designed for the body, in the perfect way.
Sorry, what do you mean the body is not present?
In the description, for example, it's not there. It's never there. So it's another funny contradiction that I really liked. So both the blanket and the nuclear core is actually perfectly designed to kill the body, the human body, but as an object, somehow they do not relate to our physicality at all.
I'm not so sure about that. In some kind of way, the kind of morphology of these small eyes is like morphology of all other tools, from the teaspoon to, I don't know what, but steering wheel in a car or something. They all are in a way they have certain kind of prosthetic quality. They're extensions of the human body. And even though it is true that there is something strangely kind of maybe antiquated in the sort of shapes and the design, for some reason, that unlike a coffee kettle, for instance, there doesn't seem to be that much kind of pressure to come up with new shapes, good looking things. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, they still seem to just simply have the logic of the human body, so it's inscribed in there. This is how you hold it. It's kind of self-evident.
Yeah, I mean, there's this mysterious, deadly element in this case. That is some...
What is it deadly? I mean, it's a sort of, the blanket is something that is very much kind of related to the proportions of the human body, or indeed the book page. The book page has so much to do just with the sort of size of my hand. The blanket has so much to do with the kind of span of my arms and my height and so on. I think we are underestimating the way the body throughout history has kind of imprinted itself or informed these shapes and these designs. I mean, they're not even designs. Nobody designed a blanket, ever. Unless, sorry if there is somebody here who designed a blanket. Or knows somebody who has designed a blanket. It's an amazing thing, designing a blanket, no?
Yeah.
It's just a thing that somehow, from the animal skin or some kind of palm leaf or something, eventually sort of took shape through a kind of dialectic between the loom that makes the textile and the proportions of the human body. And I suppose a similar kind of dialectic is present in a lot of this stuff, and not perhaps in this. I mean, the kind of nuclear fusion is a different thing, but the body is there.
Yeah.
And it is there also, like I pointed out already, in the way you then kind of present the work, the different heights of the things, the proportions of the things, and so on.
Yeah, but the question, it's really interesting, how is it present there? That's what I liked about it, just to investigate. As I said, I don't know unless I see it or I have a relation to it. But it has to have a physical form, because otherwise you're unable to say, what it is actually.
On the other hand, it would be a rather weak, if you like, reason for producing works of sculpture only to kind of, put this to a test in a...
Oh no, yeah, of course, it's like one of the reasons, obviously.
I mean, there are, many things we, can take as kind of almost axiomatic that pretty much anything that is produced to be handled by us somehow has the sort of body inscribed in it, and that's sort of it, and so on. I mean, we have to put it to test.
There's
I
another.
have a different. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, come on.
Yes, I was wondering because earlier you talked about that we cannot see what is beneath the color. We don't know where the object is from. Is it an appropriated object? Is it about bringing something into a gallery context? And I was wondering about this because you talked about a traditional approach to sculpture. So I was wondering if this is a question, or the question of what is under the color is important to you or not.
What's under?
The color of the gun. Like we said that we don't know if it's wood or if it's a former gun that was used in a war.
Yeah. But, well, what's, I guess what's the most important thing about them, which you have to know to be able to kind of grasp the whole idea, is that, it's analgesics. So without knowing it, it's just kind of a shell and a form only. So as long as you don't know, then there's no magic in it, I think.
No, as long as I do know, there is no magic.
Really?
Yeah, it's no magic, but it's kind of, something else, which is equally valuable, but let's not call it magic, of course. In some kind of way, that is your practice, and that does not make the practice any kind of weaker or any more interesting. But it is your practice. You do have the tendency to kind of give me all the information and then confront me with the object or with the situation or something like that. So I put kind of my own experience of the situation and the information sort of somehow together. And then you leave me to it, So that in some kind of way makes the object not a redundant, it's definitely not redundant, but a kind of a prop in a scenario. Yeah, because saying, imagine I mix resin with some kind of, anything, that doesn't really matter. I can sort of imagine that. But there is the fact of it that is sort of presented to me. But it is presented to me as a fact, which narrows the kind of range of imagination that can be deployed in it. Because I already know, yeah? So, it's the same thing. There is I lost this slide now. You were talking about magic, that's right. The idea of the magic is that I don't know. There is a kind of, I can show you some card tricks and explain how I do that. The magic is gone. Yeah? The magic is only magical for as long as we don't know. Precisely because that is the kind of nature. What is the nature of magic? The nature of the magic is kind of opening up a question, not giving an answer. Magic does not give answers. Magic makes us ask.
Yeah,
and so
there's magic.
I wouldn't call it magic, but
in analgesics. I don't know whether you feel it, but for me, the
yeah, but in that case, you should give me a kind of dose of pills to swallow. And then I know.
Can we get this medical question out of the way? What has actually motivated you to get into these analgesic powders? Painkillers, military stuff, etc. On one hand, you are talking about military might and military industrial complex, perhaps, and so on. But then you mentioned in passing that the significant information, which is almost painful to ask you. You mentioned the illness of your sister, of your daughter, and was that informing your sort of struggle with medical analgesic and so on? What was the outcome? So if it was a terrible outcome, we don't have to probe into this direction further. But if it was a happy outcome, then perhaps you are more free to talk about this.
Well, yeah, I can talk about it anyway. But the basic question is why analgesics, right? It's like why exactly the painkillers That's your question.
Well, that is a question that is a consequence of your state of mind.
Yeah. Well, and of course, lots of kind of autobiographical, moments on the way to the final project. I think that I don't know how to actually talk about it, but the way it works, the way it has an impact on our body is something that is so convincing and so real and so physical, and you can't just deny it. So I myself, I was addicted to sleeping pills and to all sorts of, chemical substances. And I thought, this is, it's just like, I have to make something out of it. It's like, it's just asking for it. I can't leave it like that, the whole experience. And I thought, this is this one kind of a capital, symbolic capital that I have. And I wanted to kind of annihilate, and that's the contradiction, the actual power of this object as a form. So you have a gun that actually is made out of something that instead
not
of
just an ordinary gun, it's an Uzi designed and created by Israeli army for the effectiveness and so on. You haven't got the most prolific gun, or am I mistaken? You haven't got a Kalashnikov, or have you?
It's M401, but there's a kind of version of it. Yeah, gosh,
You've got scope, you've got a handgun with a silencer, you've got anti-aircraft bullets, you've got some small explosive which I haven't seen before. What made this?
Where is all this expertise coming from?
Nice.
Yeah.
These days, I should ask.
Knowledge.
Since I'm also addicted to substances and want to kind of bring this to some kind of closure so that I can rest more, but let me just suggest something here. Look, when we are talking about magic, because that's kind of where we started, really. Is the magic there, or are we kind of taking it away? But if you like, for the sake of something else, which is equally interesting, probably. And just the term painkillers, without anybody doing anything about it, anybody being an acknowledged author of it, somehow includes already everything. It cannot include the specific biography, the kind of specific life or whatever, but art can never really quite do that anyway, or even shouldn't try. And so just the term painkillers in itself does surely not need anything else around it. The idea of a painkiller has that sort of, if you like, powerful, metaphorical, magical, kind of symbolic sort of potential. When we know that by painkillers we mean the kind of, range of medicines from, morphine to paracetamol, somehow it already sort of moves it into, some other perspective. Some of that sort of magic, of the kind of powerful magic of the term, of the word painkiller, is not lost, but more like kind of streamed sort of in a certain direction, and so on. And then when the personal story comes into it, eventually, and then when the object comes into it, and then when the revelation of what it's actually made of comes into it, it's all a process of kind of narrowing my attention to a kind of specific way of looking, or a specific way of thinking. But
You've taken it to another level with your question. No, well, I think you've taken it to another level that we've not really answered. Sorry.
No,
what was the question then?
Well, the question was relating to the psychology of the artist and her choice of tackling pharmaceuticals in the same category as and other killers, physical killers. But on the other hand, when you were talking and questioning the plinths and objects and so on, I just wondered whether I would like to have my morning coffee looking at the Uzi gun, perhaps on my mantelpiece or on this plinths, if I happen to buy this object. I immediately recalled as well that certain dictators had this kind of Uzi guns, gold-plated, and they were rinsing, glistening with gold stuff. You imbued it with these analgesic compounds. Well, fair enough. But it's slightly playing on words, which is it all there is?
Is that the question?
Language.
Is it all there is?
Yes, exactly.
Well, the answer must be no. I could do it to you straight
Ja,
away.
das ist
It's a question with 3 question marks to it.
Yeah, but somehow self-answering question. The almost rhetoric question. It's like, maybe I imagine, as an answer, I imagine myself actually having my morning, whatever, green tea with submachine gun, and I would like to look at it exactly if I knew that it's made out of this pain-killing substance. I would like to know, to be able to imagine something else. And me personally, it sends me somewhere else. This presence of analgesics, of this kind of overwhelming, feeling that you have when your pain goes away. And I kind of relate to these objects physically, very physically. And when I look at them, I remember the pain going away. And I like this feeling. I want this feeling. And that's why I would like to look at something like that, having my, whatever, morning coffee. So for me, I want to know. This is what narrows down and then kind of removes the magic for you. It actually opens the magic for me.
Well,
That's slightly different.
I think I don't mean removing the magic for me or removing the magic in general is in any kind of way a sort of negative thing. I think, in a way, this is the kind of magical business that we are involved in. To sort of somehow, if you like, distill, let's call it the magic or whatever, distill the thing in such a way that the work can do something. And this is probably a good point to kind of leave it on. What you just described is quite beautiful. In a way, you told me, if I rephrase it, that it is not at the end of the day what the work is, i.e. the information, but what it does, which really is what I would expect of art. And that's it. Shall we leave it here and devote ourselves to consumption of some substances?